All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. We're going to be talking today about embedded analytics in cloud-native environments. Just a quick round of introductions. My name is David Abramson. I am the Chief Technology Officer here at Curve, and I'm pleased to welcome our guest, Howard Dresner, who is the founder and Chief Research Officer of Dresner Advisory Services. And Howard is going to be stepping through some of their key research areas around cloud and embedded analytics. So with that introduction, I'm going to pass it over to Howard Dresner and take it away.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it. And welcome, everybody. I appreciate you carving out some time today. So we're just going to go over a few things. We published lots and lots of research during the course of the year. Last year, I think we published over 3,500 pages of research. We won't be covering all that today. Just a few concepts that I think are really important based on some of our latest research. And the first one I'm going to touch upon is information democracy, followed by cloud, followed by embedded. And all these things are kind of related to each other. And well, we'll talk about exactly how they're related in just a moment. As a matter of fact, right now. So I started talking about this notion of information democracy a full 30 years ago, 1993. And this notion of information democracy is not that everybody has access to everything, but that everyone should have access to timely and relevant insights to carry out the tasks associated with their role within an organization. And so it's not meant to be chaotic. It's meant to be helpful in terms of aligning people with the strategy and the mission of the organization through insight. Well, how does cloud and embedded help with that? Well, cloud provides us with, a transom, if you will, or a capability to extend access. It makes it easy to access. It also makes it highly performant in nature. Embedded makes it pervasive. So we can actually embed this notion of business intelligence and insights, data-driven insights, into anything. And that gets more eyes on the data and helps us achieve this notion of information democracy. So let's start off talking about cloud-based business intelligence. And when I say business intelligence, really, I mean data and analytics for end users. So users can access and analyze data from any number of sources within and beyond the enterprise. And now we've been tracking this notion of cloud computing and business intelligence for 12 years, which is really cool. We're a data-driven organization. We collect lots of data throughout the course of the last 14 years. And so it's really cool when you've got 12 years worth of data to hang your hat on and talk about what's going on in the marketplace. And so you can see over the course of 12 years, things have changed a lot, just in terms of core performance or importance, I should say. And you can see an inflection point right around 2017 or in 2018. You can see that the importance associated with cloud computing and business intelligence starts to really pick up and accelerate to where we are today. And it hasn't stopped, by the way. It continues to grow in terms of its overall importance to organizations. Even organizations or departments like finance have gotten through the knothole and see the value of cloud-based capabilities as opposed to on-prem. Now, this is one of my favorite charts. It's once again, brand new data that was collected in Q1 and came out in our Cloud Computing and Business Intelligence Report, our 12th annual report this past March. So once again, when you track this over 12 years, you can actually see real trends. And if you go all the way back to 2012, basically you have the majority of organizations saying, yeah, we're not going to do that cloud thing. We're just going to stick with our on-prem stuff. And you can see over time, through education and just seeing the value associated with cloud-based deployment, you start to see that the folks that say they're not going to do it start to decline, and the folks that say they are going to do it and are doing it start to increase. And this year, for the first time, we actually saw the folks that are deploying actually surpass the folks that aren't deploying. Now, that said, there's still a lot of work to be done here. You can see that still a lot of work is done on-prem. So there's a lot of still actually low-hanging fruit. And sometimes there are reasons that folks aren't ready to move off of their on-prem applications. And in fact, a lot of work still gets done on-prem. But there is a tremendous amount of momentum out there for folks to move off of on-prem. In fact, I heard one with one of our data leaders in our user-based community that said they had, they end up having a disaster recovery event within their event for their on-prem applications. And it was actually a ransomware issue. And that just accelerated their move into the cloud because the reliability and the security associated with those cloud-based deployments exceeds what they could do on-prem. So we also asked, for the last couple of years, we've asked about advantages and disadvantages associated with cloud-based deployment. And we talk about cloud-based, we're really talking about public cloud-based deployment as opposed to private cloud. And so you can see that, sure, there are things towards the bottom of the list here, but by and large, more than 50% of the respondents said that all of these things are in fact advantages. Certainly when you look at the top, like accessibility and availability, reliability, scalability, ease of use, those are real winners. And so by and large, the cloud just makes a whole lot of sense from a whole host of reasons, economically, of course, but also in terms of those other features that organizations talk about. Now, way at the bottom, you do see things like, cost and ROI. And it is true that in some instances, there's been less predictability around the cost of some of these applications, not all of them, but some of them. But even so, that said, still more than half are saying that it is an advantage and not a disadvantage. In terms of architectural requirements, most of these are not really a surprise, and we just look at the top ones. Obviously, well, relational database support looms large. We have a lot of data, both on-prem and up in the cloud, stored in relational types of databases, mostly transactional databases. So we need access to all that stuff. Things like automatic upgrades, that's really important and a really valuable feature. Once again, I've been in this industry, in this particular market segment, 34 years. And the problem with on-prem implementations is that everyone is out of sync. Some folks are 2 versions of an application behind or 3 versions, and it becomes problematic in terms of support. They don't always have the newest features. So automatic upgrades is really valuable because everybody always has the latest and greatest. Of course, connectors are really important to various applications, to various databases, both in the cloud and on-prem. And also, it's interesting to see multidimensional support as number 5. I wouldn't have thought that, but those are some of the top requirements. All of these are generally important, but the ones that within the top few there obviously are more critical than the rest of the ones on the list. When you look at industry support, so that was really user requirements that we just talked about a moment ago. When you look at actual industry support for those that functionality, you can see that it's roughly aligned with what the users are asking for. And also, you typically find that the vendor community or the industry tend to be ahead in terms of supporting things, much more so than the user. So typically the functionality is there long before the users actually need it, with some, some variability. So, you look at things like serverless support, not as strongly supported, streaming data support, not as strongly supported, but it's sort of the, 80-20 rule, if you will, right? So the 20% of functionality that 80% need is definitely there within the industry for cloud business intelligence. And then this slide is, we've been doing this for a few years, and it's kind of interesting, just analyzing the industry side, the vendor side of things, to see when you look at all of that business intelligence and analytical functionality, what's supported in on-prem applications versus what's supported in cloud-based applications. And what's notable, and this gap has been growing over the course of several years. I don't have that chart here, but you can see that by and large, with very few exceptions, there is more support from the supplier, the vendor-based community, for cloud-based functionality. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you're doing things on-prem, will you still be able to do them? Yeah, probably, but your choices will become fewer and fewer over time. All of the advancements and innovation is going to and is taking place in the cloud today for business intelligence capabilities.
So I'd love to jump in here, Howard, and just
Sure.
ask a couple of questions and maybe follow up on some of the key points you're making or that you found in the cloud research. Kind of at a high level, what we're seeing here at Curve is very much aligned with the trends of the survey results that you're showing. I mean, we built Curve as a 100% cloud native solution because the embedded SaaS market that we serve is almost exclusively running their workloads on public cloud infrastructure. So
Right.
The vast majority of the companies that we work with are absolutely aligned with what your research shows and just the general trend towards more cloud adoption. And what we've heard from our customer base has really focused on some of those key benefits and features. So the overall scalability, the flexibility that the cloud is offering them, particularly when they start leveraging things like serverless technology, microservices architecture, allowing them to not just scale, but also give them kind of that maximum amount of flexibility, which was obviously one of the key advantages that was identified. But it gives them that sort of flexibility to manage not just the products or the applications that they're building, but also their development processes to more easily take advantage of these sort of highly optimized cloud services that are available across pretty much every major public cloud. The other interesting thing that we see is even if they do have an older application or product that might be running on premise today, there's almost always an initiative in place to sort of start that migration process to the cloud. Like you mentioned, maybe it's a disaster recovery issue, or maybe it's something else. But this does maybe raise a couple of questions more along the lines of where do you see sort of the next phase headed? Do you still see the trend as more cloud adoption? Will it continue to go up?
Those are all great points. And I still think there's still a lot of low-hanging fruit. There are, I think there are very few reasons. There are some reasons, but few reasons not to move. And sometimes, you may have an older application that's just not available. Maybe that, company is no longer in business and there's no way to easily move it to the cloud. That's one reason. There are some industries that certain applications, it could be defense, where they're going to keep it on-prem. They're not going to keep it in the cloud. So there are a limited number, but they're in the minority. Like I said, there's still a lot of work that's done on-prem that will inevitably, in my opinion, move to the cloud and should not stay on-prem. It's just not economically viable. It doesn't make it as accessible as it needs to be. Which is a challenge to those folks that need to stay on-prem, of course, because you're not going to have the same, even vendors that continue to support an on-prem product, you're not going to get the same level of support in terms of releases. What you find is vendors that support both an on-prem and a cloud-based version, you're not going to get as many releases. You might get one release per year. It's not going to be equivalent to what's offered in the cloud. So you'll end up being ultimately at a significant disadvantage.
So as the adoption goes up, do you see any trends towards more of a multi-cloud picture, or is it single cloud mostly, or what is the research showing on that front?
Well, I think that organizations typically standardize on one cloud provider, right? But they don't want it mandated by the vendor. So there's some vendors like, yeah, we're only AWS or GCS, but you have to support whatever the customer wants, whoever they have a relationship with. And typically it's a strategic relationship. So they may not want to have 3 different cloud providers because their vendor only happened to support this one. The question is whether or not you'll see users or customers start to want to cross multiple clouds with a single application. And I think that's likely to take best advantage of what the cloud providers have to offer in a variety of geographies. And, that should be completely invisible to the customer. It shouldn't matter, or the user.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And I think one of the other points that you brought up too was this idea of kind of the cost and ROI equation that has to be factored in when people are moving to cloud. We've been hearing from several of our customers that have really sort of gone 100% in on their cloud usage, that more recently they started noticing that the costs of running their applications and products in the cloud have started to go up. This could just be a function of them doing a lot more in the cloud, leveraging more technology components, bringing in maybe data warehouse technologies that didn't exist before, such as a Snowflake, driving their costs up. But with the recent general sort of software industry trends towards more belt tightening, we're hearing that a lot of our customers and partners are looking for as many cost optimizations that they can find, whether that means doing more serverless, trying to reduce a little bit the number of or types of services they might be running. And actually in recent months, we've even seen some of the cloud providers like AWS investing more in their cost explorer tools, which provide customers with recommendations on how to save money or reduce the amount of services they might be running. So have you started seeing any of this cost optimization impact, the cost cutting trend come through in the research? And do you think it'll have much of an impact on the cloud decision-making moving forward?
Well, those are all really good points. And yeah, I think all organizations are a little bit more cost sensitive than they were perhaps 6 months ago. And I think we're starting, and our team is starting to focus more on cost governance surrounding the various technologies out there. I do agree that the technologies that are now available in the cloud have made it so much easier to store data, to analyze data, and for more people to have access to that. And we need to factor that into the equation too. It's not just cost, it's value. So we need to assess the value associated that these new tools and applications bring to bear. But it's true that there have been some, real surprises around some of the bills that get presented to management, and there has to be more predictability. I mean, one story that we heard recently was an organization that had basically discontinued an initiative, and all those people were let go, and they continued to get a $9,000 a month bill for the database software. We won't say whose it was, and nobody knew what to do with that. It's like, okay, well, we don't know what applications are using that data, so they just kept paying the bill. And obviously there needs to be, to my point, a little more governance around that stuff. Nobody wants to overspend for something and pay for something that's not actually being used. So things like serverless makes a lot of sense. Make sure we're only paying for the value that we're actually getting. So I think organizations are going to be a little bit more focused. But that said, as it relates to data and analytics, organizations are doubling down, even during the economic headwinds that we're experiencing right now. That's an area where they continue to invest. It's, in many cases, it's wholly new budget, or it's getting reallocated. So that doesn't mean they don't want to, spend wisely, but there is a tremendous amount of impetus, especially what's going on outside in terms of external factors, to really focus on the value that data and analytics can bring to the organization to help them align and execute better, and hopefully actually even thrive during these difficult times.
Yeah, and absolutely, we're seeing that too in the embedded analytics adoption and being able to deliver that value downstream to customers, which I think is a great segue kind of into this second segment here, talking about the embedded business intelligence survey results and outcomes.
Thanks, David. So yeah, we've been writing about and talking about embedded for almost as long as cloud. And so I think it's been about 10 years that we've been talking about embedded, because we believe it's a core tenet of information democracy. And the thing with embedded is that you want to deliver it to people that have no idea that they're using business intelligence. It needs to be in the context of something else that they're already familiar with. And so the more eyes you can get on the data, as I said earlier, the better alignment you get with the strategy and the mission of the organization, with the familiarity of an existing app or a portal application. So it's notable, as you look at the importance of embedded BI, it's been fairly steady, but you can see the more than half of our community of respondents are saying that it's at least very important. And I think that's going to grow over time. I think it's inevitable that it's going to grow over time as organizations see this notion, or the value of this notion of information democracy. There's another thing that we talk about, which is what we call hyper decisiveness, right? And people talk about digital enterprise, and digital enterprise is very much about data. And we refer to this notion of hyper decisiveness as taking all of the relevant information as quickly as you can and getting insights out to as many of the stakeholders as you possibly can, once again, to achieve that kind of alignment. Well, how do you do that? Not everybody's going to have a dashboard or some sort of viz tool. It's going to be in the context of something they already know, so that we don't have the burden of having to go out and train thousands of people necessarily. Okay, so when we look at adoption, there's a gap here for sure. The adoption, you have 38% that say that they're using it today, but there's plenty of opportunity. Only 12% is saying they have no plan. So there's definitely a gap, but there's also a significant opportunity as we march towards this notion of information democracy, leveraging embedded business intelligence tools and technologies. So we look at the objectives, and we put this out there several years ago to get a sense of, why do people want to do embedded business intelligence and deliver these values within the context of some other application? And we thought, well, maybe they were looking to monetize their data. And in fact, some are doing that. And there is, depending on the industry and the organization and their charter, but more often than not, what they want to do is deliver what I just talked about, this notion of information democracy. How do we get it to more stakeholders within the organization to enhance their ability to access this data? And, you can see the top three: improve self-service capabilities, enhance access to existing reports and analyses, broaden access to internal users. And so that is really the driving force within organizations to embed business intelligence capabilities. When we look at what we call interface integration, what are the things that organizations are really prioritizing? And what's notable here is that since we started tracking this particular market segment that we call embedded BI, we've seen it go from a focus on static content, just give me access to a report embedded in something else, to something that is much more dynamic and actually is integrated with the other content or application that is appearing for the user at that moment. So it's it's not only in context with the other content, but it's integrated, and it's also much more dynamic in nature. So it's not just a static report, but they want to actually navigate and interact with those objects as opposed to just view them. When we look at it from an industry perspective, for the most part, I'd say it's aligned. And I do have to note that when you look at things like, iframes and things like that, there is more of a demand by the users and a provision by the vendors to support my more lightweight integration. For the most part, in some applications, you're literally going to compile it with your existing code. But very often, certainly the users want something that's going to be a lot lighter in nature and very easy to establish and to start delivering to the end users. So things like iframes, even though it's, relatively, it's the whole application that you're embedding, it certainly does have a lot of credence with those end users. And that takes us to the last slide. And we always rate the vendors, I should note, when we publish a report. The ratings are completely objective and independent in nature. We don't play favorites here. So it is notable that our hosts today are ranked number one. They're tied for number one with our embedded business intelligence rankings in the last report that we published, which was December of 2022.
So that's fantastic, Howard. And before we sort of try to wrap things up here today, I just wanted to jump in a little bit to talk about where Curve A sort of fits, I think, in what we're seeing on some of those embedded analytics trends. I mean, embedded BI, embedded analytics is really why Curve A exists in the first place. Our technology was built with these embedded use case in mind so that our partners and customers can really provide the meaningful analytics directly where their users are. So probably as a group, our customers and partners are maybe slightly ahead of the curve when it comes to some of the stats you pointed out on adoption or desire to adopt embedded BI capabilities. But that being said, the last part you touched on related to integration is often one of the most important factors that our customers reference when it comes to working with third-party technology or vendor. And a lot of it really determines how they're gonna integrate or how they're gonna implement the capabilities of their embedded or into their embedded application. So in application design, one of the things that we keep seeing or hearing about are all of these new modern frameworks. Right. So you've got, modern frameworks like Angular or React or Express. These have kind of taken over at least what we're seeing in the software and SaaS product design world, with almost all of Curve's customer integrations really focused on embedding and integrating into those frameworks and development models. So in terms of the overall integration and how it relates to not just the research on the integration, but also some of these other vendors, are you seeing any challenges among analytics vendors that have been around a while, built potentially on some of the older technologies, trying to keep up with some of these changing trends and maybe newer frameworks in the application development space?
Most definitely, without question. But I have to note, it is really cool how easy it is to do development and to include embedded BI capabilities, which would have been really difficult in the past. I mean, realistically, would have required a core, engineering organization to do it. And that's not the case anymore. It's very fluid and very easy. But I can tell you for the older vendors, and I sympathize with them, with the challenges they face. If you take an older on-prem monolithic application and they all claim that they support the cloud. What they're really talking about is effectively a private cloud implementation, single instance. It's basically the same old application. It's just running in their server instead of yours. Not super efficient at all. And to take that and try to turn into some semblance of cloud native application, you're better off just rewriting it, frankly, to retrofit it. And I've had conversations with, with development managers around that, and it's really painful. How do you cleave that software into these smaller components? They're not even microservices. They'll never be able to do microservices unless they completely rewrite the tool set in the application. So it gives someone that's cloud native, that embraces, multi-cloud and multi-tenant and microservices architecture, gives them a distinct advantage. It allows them to be highly more adaptive to the things that are going to change in what is a very dynamic environment. And also, when you look at those older vendors, there's a long tail of technology that they're dragging with them, right? It's a lot of technology that you might not need or might not want, but you're going to have to leverage it, right? Because it's there. It's part of the whole. It's part of that monolithic software, and it's sort of, without mentioning vendors, it's kind of inseparable. Therefore, even if it were not costing you more, it's going to cost you more in terms of system resources and in terms of people resources in order to leverage that and to take advantage of it.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, almost aligned very much with sort of the overall discussion on cost ROI that we talked about a little bit on the cloud implementations and the trends that exist there. But I think overall this has been a fantastic presentation and discussion. Great to learn about the long history of the research that's available now with the direction of where it's going with cloud, as well as the embedded business intelligence. And so I'd like to thank Howard for helping us deliver the content today and participating in our webinar here from Curve. And if there's any questions from anybody, reach out. I'd love to connect. You can find me on email or on LinkedIn. You can visit Curve's website, curve.com. But thanks again to Howard and for everybody watching the webinar today. And have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, David.